Very good.
Okay.
I talked to him over the phone.
Okay, good,
He's
yeah.
from North Carolina.
Right.
Very good, though.
Oh, good.
The stories about the debates.
See, that stuff I don't remember.
Well, yeah, like I always say, like you didn't have a memo like you were supposed to remember a lot. So I will say, first of all, if you do remember anything, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Hey,
hard to, I don't remember a lot from yesterday.
no, you and me both. But you did look at the southwards, right? I told you to, yeah. That senior superlative issue, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That'll give you some idea. And
Penn has really become southwards.
well, it's very exciting when I was
know
glad
more
when they
about
put
you
them.
than
Yeah,
you
the-
know.
Oh, yeah.
It's good that they put them all online.
Isn't it nice? Yes, because I did
That they're all.
send that out to a lot of the, because it's fun for them to see, for all of us to remember those things. All right, ladies, we ready?
We're all set?
All right. Well, first off, thank you so much for meeting with us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Looking forward to it. So can you please state your name and spell it for the camera?
Yes, Betsy Ebeling, Betsy Ebeling.
And then,
Let me just, occasionally I'll interject if something comes up, but could you also tell us Betsy Johnson? Ebeling?
Johnson was my maiden name, S-O-N, yes.
so we'd like to talk first about Hillary's life in Chicago. So when and where was Hillary born?
Edgewater Hospital, if I remember, October 26th, 1947. Is this the test?
Repeat that, but say it in a complete sentence. Hillary was born.
Okay.
Okay.
Hillary was born, I believe, at Edgewater Hospital, which no longer exists, October 26th, 1947.
I'm sorry, one more time. Leave out the I believe, because she was. Hillary
okay.
was born at Edgewater Hospital. Yeah.
Hillary was born at Edgewater Hospital in Chicago. It no longer exists, on October 26th, 1947.
And where did the family live?
Now that I don't really know, but in that Edgewater area, if I recall. But in Chicago, city of Chicago.
And what stands on the site of, do you know what stands on the site of where they lived now?
When she was growing up here in Park Ridge? Do you mean? No?
Okay, I'm sorry. We wanted to establish that she was born in Chicago. So her address was actually 5722 North Winthrop.
Oh,
Okay.
that.
Okay. Would you mind repeating that answer? Hillary lived at.
Hillary lived at 5722 North.
Okay, let's do it again.
All this is.
It's not a question. Yes, 5722 North Winthrop.
Okay, Hillary lived at 5722 North Winthrop in the city of Chicago.
What stands on the site of that apartment building now?
That I don't know.
You have to go there. It's the Rodham Arms condominiums.
Really?
Yes.
Ah, isn't that sweet? They know a little bit more than Park Ridge.
Okay, we'll just show a picture of that so you don't have to answer that question.
Yeah, Hugh and Dorothy would be very proud.
And what did Mr. Rodham do for a living?
At that time, I'm not really sure, but when I knew him, he had a drapery company that printed fabric that mostly went to draperies, and he had people who silk screened the fabric. Yeah, and his office was down in the Merchandise Mart in Chicago.
Can you tell us what you know about Hugh Rodham running for alderman in Chicago?
And that I didn't learn either until she was running. So now I don't know anything about that. But it wouldn't, surprise me because I'm sure somebody got his dander up. So he thought, I'll run. At least he was always one of those people that put his money where his mouth was. He would follow through on, I'm going to get them. So he would definitely run for something. Yeah.
Would you mind saying Mr. Rodham always put his money where his mouth was? Something like that states his name for us. We're not having a narrator in this program. We're just using
Okay.
sound bites, so they have to be complete so they make sense. So
Okay.
I'm sorry if I'm
No.
interjecting a bit.
That's fine. This a little different from what I'm used to.
Yeah.
Mr. Rodham, when I knew him, a little later, when we were about 11 years of age, had an office at the Merchandise Mart in Chicago. And he had a silk screening fabric company. Most of that fabric went to draperies, as I recall. But I don't remember where the factory was. I remember going there, but I just don't remember where it was.
We'll skip that next question, since she does not remember it, so, okay.
When did the Rodham family move to Park Ridge, and do you know what their address was?
They moved, I believe, when Hillary was 2 years old. So that was before her brothers were born. It was on the corner of Elm and Wisner. I think the address, if I remember, is 235 Wisner. Yes, in Park Ridge.
What was your address, and how far away was your house from Hillary's?
About 6 blocks I lived from Hillary's house. We were at 189 Michael John Drive, almost directly behind here.
What schools did you attend together?
We went to Field Elementary, and then we went to Emerson, which was the old Emerson Junior High, because they knocked that one down, I believe. And then we went to Maine East for 3 years while they built Maine South. And then we went to Maine South the first year it was open, and we were the first graduating class.
What did you each want to be when you grew up?
I suppose when I think back, I probably always wanted to be a teacher when I grew up, but that too was one of those things, if you were female during those times, you know, if you hesitated when they said, what do you want to be when you grow up? Sorry, sweetheart, I know you're studying nursing, and they either pushed you into nursing or teaching, but it did appeal to me, and I eventually became a teacher for a while. Hillary always wanted to be a doctor until she actually saw the sight of blood and decided it wasn't for her. Little did she know she would enter a bloody sport called politics, right?
What do you remember about Hillary being a crossing guard?
Ah, she was captain, please, captain of the crossing guards. It was a big honor in 6th grade. You know, so she organized us and put everybody on corners. And Dennis Osgood was captain of the boys. They were the patrol boys. So
Describe the programs you attended at the Park Ridge Public Library.
golly, I don't remember exactly what programs, if any, that we attended, but we did use the library a great deal for studying or, you know, goofing around a lot. I'm sure there was that as well. Meeting friends there. But it was a great center of the community, great center.
What did you girls do at Girl Scouts?
I wasn't a Girl Scout. I was a campfire girl. She was a Girl Scout. And Sookie Askew's mom was the Girl Scout leader. That I know because she lived until a couple years ago. And Sookie would be a great interview for you. She's out in Palo Alto, and you might be interested. She's always worked for NASA, but in Palo Alto. And we really do. But her mom was great. She was the Brownie leader as well as the Girl Scout leader. But so I can't, you know, they didn't give out any of their secrets, so I was only with the campfire girls at that time.
So we heard that you two have a variety of after-school jobs, including at South Park. What were some of your more memorable stories?
Hillary was at South Park. She was the lifeguard, so to speak, at the children's little pool, you know, 0 depth, I would imagine it is. And I worked at Sears over in Golf Mill. It was fairly new then. So I worked in, you know, wherever department they would send you. It was actually before scanners or any of those things. So you had to add up and come up with a number and then enter it into, oh yeah, I was thinking about this the other day because the cash registers did not have any algorithms built into them. So you would keep adding, and then you'd push this thing up and it would come up with but you hand wrote Sears, so. But Hill was there at South. Trying to remember if she were there more than one summer. That I don't recall.
Describe the experience of babysitting the children of migrant workers.
She did that with her mom. They did that through the Methodist church here in town, in Park Ridge. And so that was one of the youth membership. And her mom was a Sunday school teacher there. So I know that they went a couple times. And it made quite an impression on her. It did.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. You didn't mention the phrase migrant workers, the children of migrant workers.
Okay.
Could you?
Sure.
Thanks.
I do know that sometime when we were in, I believe, middle school, may have been a little later than that, Hillary's mother was a Sunday school teacher for quite a while at the First United Methodist Church here in Park Ridge. And one of the programs that they had was they would go to the Arlington racetrack, to the back, what they call the back track, and help with the children who were living there while their parents were working at the track. And I know it was quite an impressive outing for her several times. She did. I think that's probably one of the times that she really saw that there were children who weren't living a Park Ridge life. And children became very much a part of what she did when she did, as far as studying was concerned, very much.
What do you remember about your time together at Emerson Junior High?
Well, we were the big cheeses, weren't we? I mean, it was something after being in elementary school, and it was a brand new school. We had at Field a sixth grade teacher, Elizabeth King, and she was an amazing teacher. I would venture to say, if you ask Hillary, she would say probably the best teacher she had as a child growing up. Recognized quickly our love of reading, but she was also one of these who was very project-oriented. And we constantly, if there were a holiday coming up, you knew that you were going to have to hand in a booklet on that. But Elizabeth King ended up going to Emerson with us. And she was our 7th and 8th grade language arts teacher. So the transition wasn't quite as frightening as it might have been. But it was a great school with great kids, many of whom we see now still. So it was very good.
Who were the Art Curtain and Jim Van Schuck? Do you remember who the Art Curtain and Jim Van Schuck were?
Jim Van Schoik and who?
Schoik.
Art Curtis?
Art Curtin?
Curtis.
Curtis.
Is that who you're talking about? Have you interviewed him?
No, we found him we just have a little
Yeah.
connection.
You should. You would. He was the valedictorian of our class, and he was at Northwestern. He was in the 6-year medical program at Northwestern. Became an ENT, and he's just retired. I know, and he has a place right up in Michigan City, so I do see him very often. And Jim Van Schoik was Hillary's senior prom date. That's as much as I will.
I'm
Pardon?
sorry, did Hillary date Art Curtis?
No, I don't think so. No.
What was the Robin Hood?
Is that my phone? I'm sorry. I could turn that off. Yeah, no, please do. I'm sorry. What was what?
What was the Robin Hood?
Oh, the restaurant? I feel like this is a test. I do remember having a very spicy spaghetti there when I was little. It was, I just because I came up Toohey, there's a bridal shop there now, right at Toohey and Prospect, and that's where the restaurant was, the Robin Hood. So everybody went there before going to the show at the Pickwick.
How did Hillary come to act on stage?
Because I don't know if the main schools still have variety show, do they? And is it still a big deal? Because it was a huge deal when we were there. So whether you had chops or not, you tried out. It was a big deal to be in junior year. She was part of that big group, right? I think that sang. I can't remember what it was. It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Okay, yes. We'd like to talk some more about Hillary's family since they were so important in helping to create the woman she has become. So please tell us what you know about the Rodham family vacations back to Mr. Rodham's home in Pennsylvania.
Yes. That was always the threat, the vacations to Pennsylvania, because you have to understand, Hillary's father's father came from Wales and came over and worked in lace factory in Scranton. And then, why can't I think of the name? Anyway, they had this little cottage, and I mean, it was little, and it had no indoor plumbing. I think it finally did have electricity. You know, for her brothers, it was great because it was wild and crazy and fun, but for her mom and for her, it was not very comfortable. And they'd get into the car and have to drive out there. But her dad would always kind of dangle that, you know, if you came and had a good time with us, and the Rodhams, all of them, are amazing card players. They played, you know, Yahtzee, or what's the one? Why can't I remember it? A lot of canasta, but they played also pinochle. They played a lot. Her dad loved to play pinochle, but they all played card games, so that when she and Bill Clinton met, I mean, he's a card fanatic, so it was, you know, that's really what brought them together. People don't realize that, but it was definitely cards. But to go to the cottage was every summer, and they did. I almost went several times, but I don't know whatever happened, why we didn't. But at the end of the trip, he would say, if you come, then we'll drive into New York, and we'll spend one day in the city. And then they would get to the city, and Mr. Rodham would say, all right, you have 2 hours. What you can buy in 2 hours, you may have. So she and Hillary and her mom would take off their shoes and go running through New York City buying. So, but I'll tell you, it's been modernized, because I know the boys go back, and I know she's been back there. When her dad died, and he was buried near there in Scranton, near his father's grave, I know they spent a couple days there, which that's quintessential Hugh Rodham, that whole area. So that she and Joe Biden had a lot in common, because it was Scranton, Pennsylvania. Very sweet.
What sports did Mr. Rodham play with his children?
Football, definitely, because he played football at Penn State, as did her brother Huey. And Tony played football. Jeez, now I can't remember. Where did Tony go to school? Yes, football, definitely. Baseball. There were a lot of boys our ages who lived in that quadrangle right there of Wisner and Elm. And the Durnells were right across the street, and they were, you know, wild and crazy. And you used to play softball or baseball, and the sewers were the 4 bases when you would run on the street. So there was always a game going on there.
You used to all go ice skating on the Des Plaines River too, with the fathers, I understand.
I didn't go. We didn't go. She may have gone through church on the Des Plaines, but we used to skate all the time. They would flood the tennis courts over near Field School. We skated there all the time, every winter. Yeah, it was wonderful.
Some describe Hugh Rodham as a creature of habit. What was his routine?
His routine was his routine. I don't know if I would ever describe Hugh as a creature of habit. He lived larger than life. He's just one of those people, when he came into a room, he filled it without even speaking. He just had a big personality, and he was a good guy.
Mr. Rodham was known to be frugal.
Oh, yes.
How did Mr. Rodham conserve money?
Oh, minute by minute. You know, it was. Yet they had this beautiful home, which he paid cash for. Yeah. And I mean, he didn't come from, as you can see, with a father working in a lace factory. And then he went in, after Penn State, he went into the Navy, and he was up here at Great Lakes. And that's how he found this area. rather than going back to Pennsylvania. But I'm sorry, the question?
Oh, I had read that he made the kids pull weeds, pull dandelions.
Oh,
for
I'm
their-
sure he did, yeah. Nothing wrong with doing some chores, right? Tried it this weekend. We actually had a quarter to pick up shoes and do other things with my grandchildren. But no, he pinched every penny, but nobody starved. Nobody went without shoes or clothing at all. And to this day, I would say that Hillary's concern with making money and making sure that people always have access to jobs and health care, because you have to have money in order to do those for the most part, were very concerning to her. And I think that was well formed in her household by her dad, that money just didn't grow on trees. You worked hard. And she's a hard worker. Anybody will tell you that.
Please tell us if you're comfortable about some difficult times at Hillary's house that you may have witnessed.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. Sometimes some of the others said that he would yell or something like that, but it's okay. If you don't want to go there, you don't have to go there. Describe Hillary's relationship with her brothers, Hugh and Tony.
Oh, it's still extremely close. Hugh and Tony are 4 years and 4 years, 8 years younger. Yes. Huey being the older brother, and he's an attorney, but he's retired now, lives down in Miami. And he and Maria have doggies that he loves. And Huey is as crazy a Blackhawks fan as I am. So, except he has this annoying habit of he doesn't watch the game when it actually goes on. He tapes it and watches it the next morning. So I can't even text him or anything to say, "Did you see that?" It's a good kid. Good kid. And Tony too. Tony is still living outside of Washington in Virginia. And he was married to Barbara Boxer's daughter. Together they have a son, Zach, who just graduated from USC. And then he married Megan, and they have 2 little ones. And let me think, Simon must be 8, and Fiona must be 10. Fiona looks like a little Hillary at that age, very much so.
Thanks.
So Hillary's father drove Hillary herself and her 2 brothers to Skid Row in Chicago. Could you describe it if you were there for it?
That I don't know. I know, to all the 7 Sisters luncheons, you probably don't know anything about that. When there were the 7 Sisters, were the colleges out east, Hillary ended up going to Wellesley. My father said, "Are you crazy? You want to go out east?" Like it was going, to another planet. No. My father's whole life was to have me go to Northwestern, and I knew that was much too close. But anyway, they would have these luncheons during the Christmas of your senior year to kind of, for them to see you and for you to see all these alums as well as students who were there. And Hugh would drive us, and that was always an experience with Hugh. So, no, not Skid Row. These were different houses from that. Hillary and I did campaigning and stuff down near Chinatown. What is Chinatown now? She was a little farther south than I was, I think.
Could you tell us about that campaigning?
Sure. We were Goldwater girls. We set up the office. It was right on Prospect, right near what used to be the old post office. And Bachman's was right there. And there was a little office that the Republican Party, I guess, rented, and they gave it to us to set up, which we did, amazingly. And one of the things that they did was they took us when they were going into the city to check registrations. And can you imagine taking, 2 17-year-old girls, and they gave us clipboards and said, go into these buildings and check to see if these people do exist, or if they're registered, if it's dead people registered or whatever. That we did quite a few times when I think about it. It was very interesting. can't believe our parents said okay, but they did.
Mr. Rodham was known to be a conservative, and yet he employed an African-American man in his business who was down on his luck.
Yep.
Could you tell us what you know about that?
I just know that he was just part of our lives. When we were in high school, Jim. His name was Jim, when I think about it. And he'd often come to the house and do stuff at the house as well. Kind man, if I do remember that. Unusual for Park Ridge at that time.
I'm sorry, could you say Jim was
Jim.
an African-American man who was employed by Mr. Rodham? Could you make that a complete sentence?
Sure.
Thanks.
Jim was an African-American gentleman who was employed by Hugh Rodham in his business, yes, the drapery business.
How much did Hillary talk about her mother's childhood?
We didn't really know. I don't know how much before I knew about Dorothy's childhood till I think it was probably when Hillary was writing It Takes a Village, when she really talked about it. Her mom had a sister and who was a couple years younger, and that was the only family that I knew of her family that used to come to Park Ridge, but nobody talked about it, so it was quite an eye-opener to hear that, to hear her story of growing up.
Could you describe Dorothy's reaction to Hillary being bullied?
Well, I'm sure Dorothy was a very strong woman, and she just said, you don't take it. You don't whine about it anyway. You go out and deal with it. Very good preparation for a lot of those boys out there.
Could you explain Dorothy Rodham's quote about a carpenter's level?
That I don't know.
How is Hillary alike and unlike her mother?
Well, both Dorothy and Hillary are very strong women who know their own minds, who love their families very much. Their children mean everything to them. Circumstances were such that Dorothy was home, not going to law school, but they were the best of friends, as she was with Chelsea's, and her kids were part of her everyday life. Everybody calls. I think when I think about Dorothy, I think of the memorial service that they had after she died, and it was in October or early November because she died on Halloween, in Washington, at their house in Washington, D.C. And Dorothy loved her garden, a beautiful garden, and toward the end of her life, because she was 92 or 93, I don't know, we went to her 90th birthday if I remember, but excuse me, she lived most of the time in the house in Washington, D.C. She often someone would come and get her and take her to the house in New York as well. But most of the time she lived in Washington, and it has beautiful gardens, and the gardens are because Dorothy loved those gardens. And although she wasn't physically up to gardening anymore, Hillary had hired this landscaper, who really connected with Dorothy. And the two of them planned all this garden. It was beautiful. And so her memorial was there in the garden that day. And it was a gorgeous November day, warm. And but what I always remarked on, there were about 20 of us, I think, who got up and spoke at this service. But probably 7 or 8 of them were young people who were friends of Chelsea's, who had known Dorothy through Chelsea all those years. And so many of those young people, she had separate relationship from being with Chelsea. There were 2 young guys who talked about they always went to the newest movies with her. They would take her to the movies. So she had quite a second life. It may not have been You know, she also, when we were in college, I believe, if I recall right, she went to Oakton Community College and took courses. Her Hillary's brother Huey was studying in Columbia, the country, Columbia. And so she went to learn Spanish so she could go visit him. So that inquisitive mind that you also follow through on, they weren't just impulses, these were things that she really cared deeply about. That's very strong, the two of them. Reading was very much, I remember Bill saying in Dorothy's bedroom in the house in Washington, D.C., after she had passed away and they were in the bedroom, there was this very deep philosophy book on the nightstand. And he said, I can't get through it, but she would read it. And always had several books going at the same time. So that's very much mother and daughter. But Dorothy had a love of beauty. Do you know what I mean? For someone who came from absolutely nothing and had been given very little in her life, she learned to populate her house. She was the first person I knew who had stained glass windows. She would find them and collect them and put them, and you could see them. I don't think they're there anymore, but lean them up. There were things that I learned a lot from her. She used to collect, they called them slides. They were little jeweled things that gentlemen, when they used to have in their waistcoat, you know, they'd have a watch and it would be chained, right? And it would have these little slides on it, and she'd collect those. They were bracelets that she made out of those. And Hillary really was always very busy studying and doing stuff, but particularly, I would say, well, when she was First Lady in, excuse me, in Arkansas, when Bill was elected, the mansion, so to speak, the mansion, had pretty much been, the furniture had been removed. I mean, it was really empty. And a la Jackie Kennedy, who had redone the White House, she got people in Arkansas to either donate money or donate actual antiques that were Arkansan, and filled up the house with it. And in the process really got into beautiful furniture and how things looked together. And that I don't think that was by osmosis. I'm not sure she knew that she'd gotten that from her mom, but she did. Those are a few things.
So what was Miss Rodham like as a Sunday school teacher at the First United Methodist?
I don't know because I didn't go there, but if I know her, she was well-read, prepared, excuse me, and loved kids. So I'm sure she, Cheryl, I mean, when you talk to Cheryl Harbor, she probably talked about, there's a whole group that we're at First United Methodist together, still around.
So if you did not know Don Jones personally?
I did, yes, quite well.
Okay, then we'll continue. Thanks.
Can you describe the personality of your pastor, Don Jones?
He was the youth pastor at First United Methodist for Hillary. Don Jones was. His wife's name's going to go right out of my mind. But he was only there a year or two. He was quite different from the elders of the Park Ridge First United Methodist Church. I don't think they knew what they were hiring, and he came and was a breath of fresh air, you know. At least for us, it was very exciting for that age, because they had so many outings that the youth groups would do. So that's how I often would end up mixed in, you know. Great. He was a real thinker. You know, he'd been places. He was from the East. That was part of Hillary's attraction to Wellesley, was that it was out east. Yeah, very different from what we had been. A kind man, very nice man, very, very learned, and very near and dear to Hillary's heart.
So the country was changing a lot, and your grandfather described himself as progressive. What do you remember about when he took you to go see Dr. King?
My grandfather? I I remember that it was very important to him, and it was strange to go downtown Chicago and not go to Marshall Fields or go to Stouffer's for lunch. I mean, that was, or the Art Institute. You know, this was at the Sunday evening club at the CSO. And it was eye-opening to me. It was, you know, an African-American gentleman speaking, and he was a minister. That was very different for me. But I could tell how important he was to my grandfather. And my grandfather was very important to me. So hearing this it really did. So that when the Methodist Church was going to go, I told Hillary she was in for a good hearing. Yeah. We had very liberal social study teachers at Emerson as well. Yeah. Mr. Kenvin was he was a Democrat. Yes, one of those.
So how did Hillary get to shake Dr. Martin Luther King's hand?
That I don't really know, and I don't. But if I know Don Jones, he probably talked somebody into letting a group of kids in.
Can you describe your trip with Hillary to the Democratic National Convention in 1968?
We were both home from college. Hill had been the year before, had studied in Madrid. And so I was very worldly. And Hillary I think that was the summer she had been in Alaska, working in the fish canneries. So we were home, and she called, she said, you know, this thing's going on, we should probably go check it out. So I told my mother, as did she, that we were going to the movies, and took my family station wagon and drove downtown. To this day, I don't remember how I knew how to do that, or where I knew how to park, or where we were going, but we ended up there. We went 2 nights. So it was quite the adventure. And if Martin Luther King's speech was eye-opening, this was heart-opening to us. We finally, I guess, understood what all the brouhaha was about that had been going on campus. So, and you know, we were just walking into Grant Park near the Hilton when we ran into Jeannie Snodgrass. I wonder if I think she's still in Washington. Jeannie was a high school classmate of ours, and she went into nursing at Illinois. And so this was the summer before our senior year of college, and she volunteered at the convention, at, you know, the ground zero where all the protests were going on in Grant Park. So she was patching heads up, you know, and she said, you got to come see this, you got to come with us. So we went into this tent where they were putting kids back together. So yeah, that was quite the adventure for 2 little girls from the suburbs. Yeah.
Can you tell us anything more about patching heads? Or is that pretty much it?
No, I mean, she actually was one that testified, you know, when they had the trial, the 7, when you know, they had arrested the 7 guys who were, and when they had the trial, what was that old judge's name? I can't remember. But they did call her as a witness. I mean, it was every bit as dramatic as you might have seen in a movie. You know, throwing toilets out the Hilton windows and police. And I had just come from Franco's Spain, where one did not cross any sort of rules. You know, you lived a very safe life as long as you didn't go against what was the rules. So to come back to this and to see how things were being handled was eye-opening, as I used before. Sorry.
And then, what teachers encouraged Hillary to apply to Wellesley College?
Let me see if I can remember. She was the one who took us all to the 7 Sister lunches. Anne, She was let me think of her last name. She was our government teacher senior year at Maine South, and she was an intern. She was doing a master's at teaching through Northwestern, and so she would come in the mornings or afternoons, whatever it was, and teach. And she lived in Evanston, along the lake there, and she was very encouraging, very encouraging. And it worked out.
Do you remember her name?
Yes, it'll come to me. Anne was her first name. Very pretty. She was probably just 22. Hill might remember. Yeah. Sorry, it's a little fuzzy.
So during high school, so Hillary ran a lot of political campaigns for herself or for student council. She won some and she didn't win some.
The big one, yeah, we didn't. Boys always won that
Can you
one.
talk about how that whole process, how she was when she was running and
Well,
what she was like?
Both Maine East and Maine South, student council and class council, I don't know if you still have all of that. Student government was very important, and many kids could participate. And yes, it was an elective thing. It was a popularity contest, but you did get kids who really cared about. I mean, when we went to Maine South, we wrote all we wrote all of that stuff. We, chose the name of the teams we did. So that was quite, heady, I guess. But she ran for our junior year. We used to have a thing called the jitney. Did you still have that? You would run all week. They'd have, in homeroom, and candidates would go to each homeroom and say, you should vote for me, you should vote for me. That were running for officers' positions. And then on Friday night of that week, there was a big dance. And at this dance, they would announce who had won. And so, yes, she did. But she was on student council, if I remember, all 4 years. And that when she didn't win as president of student council, she was made chairman. I don't know if you still have organizations committee. They were the ones that ran all the elections and everything within the school.
You remember there's this, Ernie Ricketts told a story about she organized a convention type election that happened.
Now, Ernie, you have to realize, has a whole life for us that all of us would have been delighted to have had. But no, I mean, the convention, she and Ernie, I think, did organizations together. That was the committee they were on in student council. So they would oversee this whole week of running for office, and then the big dance on Friday night when they would announce everybody. Yeah, and probably counted the votes, if I remember. I was, yes, because she called me to say, as my official title of organizations chair, I must tell you that you've been elected senior class secretary. So, which I thought was very funny. I went, oh yeah, you're really, yeah. She said, no, this is really true. Oh, okay. Yeah, so if I do remember, she and Ernie ran that, which would mean she would do a lot of the work and Ernie would make everybody happy. Even the losers, right?
What's your favorite memory of Hillary, like from any point in your life? But is there like any one or two memories that just kind of stand out of like?
This last year has been very hard. But I suppose if I look at a year ago now, her acceptance speech at the convention, I was a delegate from Illinois. That was quite a proud moment. I actually announced the votes from Illinois. Yeah, that was pretty neat. I think when Chelsea was born, probably that too. We've always had touchstones in our life that have been strangely the same. But I guess you do that with friends, very much. Yeah.
See, there's something different about Hillary that a lot of people don't know, is she's really maintained such a strong group of friends since growing up.